In the sweltering summer of 1789, across the sun-baked fields and shadowed hedgerows of rural France, a single whispered rumor began its deadly journey. It traveled not on swift hooves, but on the trembling lips of exhausted peasants, leaping from hamlet to hamlet with terrifying speed. Tales spoke of roving bands of brigands, armed by vengeful aristocrats, descending like wolves to torch harvests, rape women, and slaughter entire villages before the king's soldiers could respond. The air grew thick with dread. Every distant dust cloud on the horizon became a harbinger of doom. Farmers who had risen before dawn to till failing crops now clutched pitchforks and axes at nightfall, their eyes scanning the tree lines for shadows that might never come. This was no ordinary panic. It was the invisible spark that would accelerate the implosion of one of Europe's mightiest monarchies. The collapse did not announce itself with trumpets or proclamations. It began quietly, in the fertile soil of fear where rumors took root and grew into an unstoppable force, proving that words, once unleashed, could dismantle empires faster than any army. For centuries, the Kingdom of France had stood as a pillar of European civilization, its grand palaces and fertile plains feeding both the splendor of Versailles and the ambitions of kings. Under the Ancien Régime, society was rigidly ordered into three estates: the clergy, the nobility, and the vast third estate that carried the realm's burdens. Daily life for most unfolded in timeless rhythms. Peasants rose with the sun to till wheat fields that stretched to the horizon, their wooden plows scraping against exhausted soil, while the scent of fresh earth mingled with wood smoke from modest hearths. In bustling market towns, merchants haggled over grain and cloth, as church bells marked the hours of prayer and labor. Nobles in powdered wigs hosted lavish hunts and soirees, their silk garments whispering against marble floors, seemingly oblivious to the gathering storms beyond their gilded gates. Life felt eternal, anchored by tradition, divine right, and the slow turning of seasons. Yet beneath this surface of routine lay cracks invisible to those who benefited most from the old order. The weight of taxes, tithes, and feudal dues pressed heaviest on those who could least afford it, creating a fragile foundation that few dared question aloud. Bad harvests in the years leading up to 1789 had already strained the kingdom's fragile economy. Rivers ran low under a merciless sun, crops withered in the fields, and bread prices soared in the cities, turning the staple food of the poor into a luxury. Early warning signs flickered like distant lightning. Letters from provincial intendants spoke of restless crowds and mounting debts, but these reports gathered dust in royal offices. Whispers in Paris salons about philosophical ideas from Voltaire and Rousseau circulated among the educated, questioning the natural order of kings and subjects. Still, most peasants and artisans clung to their daily routines, finding solace in familiar cycles of planting and prayer. No one yet understood how these scattered grievances could coalesce into something far more dangerous. The monarchy, burdened by costly wars and extravagant court life, floated on loans that grew heavier each year. Inflation gnawed at wages, while the wealthy evaded their share of responsibility. These invisible pressures built slowly like tectonic forces beneath the earth, waiting for a trigger to release their fury. The stage was set, but the actors had not yet realized the script was changing. As spring gave way to summer in 1789, tension rippled through the kingdom following the convocation of the Estates General. The king's hesitant reforms and the Third Estate's bold declaration of a National Assembly signaled shifting power, yet royal indecision only deepened uncertainty. Rumors began to multiply in this atmosphere of instability. Stories spread that the nobility was hoarding grain to starve the people into submission, or that foreign mercenaries were being assembled to crush the awakening revolution. In the countryside, these tales transformed fear into action. Villagers abandoned their fields to form makeshift militias, their voices rising in urgent councils by firelight. The air carried the metallic tang of freshly sharpened blades, and the acrid smoke of signal fires lit on distant hills. Daily life fractured, markets grew tense with accusations, and old social bonds strained under suspicion. What had once been idle gossip now carried the weight of potential survival. The monarchy's attempts at control through censorship, only fueled the belief that hidden truths were being concealed, accelerating the flow of unverified information from town to town. Pressures mounted as economic woes intersected with political paralysis, creating a volatile mixture where every unconfirmed report gained the force of truth. Key decisions by those in power proved fateful. Louis XVI's reluctance to embrace meaningful change, coupled with the Queen's perceived foreign loyalties, became fodder for increasingly wild speculation. Rumors about Marie Antoinette's alleged extravagance and secret dealings with Austria spread like contagion through pamphlets and tavern talk, eroding whatever remained of royal legitimacy. Meanwhile, in the provinces, the fear of aristocratic plots took on a life of its own. Messengers raced along dusty roads carrying exaggerated accounts of violence that may or may not have occurred. Local leaders, sensing the vacuum of authority, made hasty choices to arm their communities against imagined threats. These pressures exposed the brittleness of the old system, a centralized monarchy unable to communicate swiftly or credibly with its people. The reliance on oral transmission in an era before mass media made distortion inevitable. Every delay in official news created space for panic to flourish. By late July, the kingdom teetered on the edge, its institutions hollowed out not just by fiscal crisis, but by the corrosive power of unchecked narratives that no one could fully control. The moment the system began to fail arrived not with a single dramatic battle, but through a cascade of rumor-driven actions known as the Great Fear. In the days following the storming of the Bastille, waves of panic swept the countryside, as stories of invading brigands and noble revenge multiplied exponentially. Villages emptied, as inhabitants fled or fortified, only to encounter other frightened groups carrying similar tales. Chateaus were attacked and burned, feudal records destroyed, in bonfires that lit the night sky with orange fury. The silence that followed each rumor's passage was broken by the crackle of flames and the cries of displaced families. What began as whispers had become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Fear prompted violence, which in turn generated more terrifying stories that raced ahead of any factual accounting. The royal administration, already weakened, found itself paralyzed, unable to separate truth from fabrication. The collapse accelerated because rumors bypassed traditional hierarchies, empowering ordinary people to act, while simultaneously undermining the very structures meant to maintain order. In this vacuum, authority evaporated almost overnight. The human consequences unfolded with devastating clarity. Families who had known only the quiet struggles of rural poverty now faced chaos and displacement. Widows clutched children close as armed bands roamed, their faces gaunt with hunger and terror. Social bonds that had endured generations fractured under suspicion. Neighbors accused one another of being spies or hoarders. In the cities, bread riots turned deadly as rumors of royal betrayal inflamed crowds already pushed to the brink. The scent of smoke and blood replaced the familiar smells of baking ovens and livestock. Fear became a tangible presence, heavy in the chest, shortening tempers and clouding judgment. As the old order crumbled, a new reality of uncertainty took hold. Thousands were uprooted, estates looted, and ancient customs swept away in the tide of revolutionary fervor. The rumors had not merely reflected crisis, they had intensified and prolonged it, turning manageable discontent into widespread breakdown. Society fragmented along lines of class and loyalty, with human suffering etched into every burned village and abandoned farmstead. In the aftermath, the French Revolution transformed from a moment of reform into a decade of radical upheaval, terror, and eventual Napoleonic conquest. The power of rumors to accelerate collapse revealed itself as a lasting lesson in how information, when untethered from truth, can unravel even the strongest institutions. What followed was the abolition of feudalism, the rise of republican ideals, and waves of violence that consumed many of the revolution's own leaders. Europe watched in awe and horror as one kingdom's internal rupture reshaped alliances and borders for generations. The economic and social wounds took years to heal, leaving scars visible in the political landscape of the 19th century. Long-term, the events demonstrated that collapses are rarely caused by a single force, but are propelled by amplifiers like rumor, which exploit existing weaknesses and magnify them beyond repair. The monarchy fell not solely because of debt or famine, but because narratives of conspiracy filled the void, left by failing governance. Yet the story of rumors' accelerating collapse echoes far beyond the fields of 1789. Throughout history, from the dying days of the Roman Empire, where tales of barbarian hordes spread terror in the provinces, to later financial panics, where whispers of bank failures triggered devastating runs, the pattern repeats with haunting consistency. In each case, the gap between official truth and popular perception becomes a breeding ground for acceleration. When trust in institutions erodes, people turn to the most immediate sources of information, however flawed. These dynamics expose the fragile threads holding civilizations together: shared reality, credible authority, and measured response. Once severed, recovery demands more than material rebuilding. It requires restoring the common ground upon which societies stand. The French experience stands as a stark illustration of how quickly order can dissolve when fear travels faster than facts. As the embers of those revolutionary fires cooled across Europe, a deeper truth lingered in the collective memory. Rumors do not merely accompany collapse, they act as catalysts, speeding the descent by eroding cohesion and provoking rash actions in moments of vulnerability. In the quiet villages where the great fear once raged, new generations would rise, carrying both the ideals of liberty and the cautionary weight of how easily panic can consume reason. The landscapes once scarred by torch and rumor slowly healed under different skies, yet the invisible forces that shaped those events remain ever present. Today, as in centuries past, the speed of unverified information continues to test the resilience of nations and peoples. The collapse, when it comes, rarely arrives announced by clear warnings. It creeps forward on currents of doubt and distortion, gaining momentum until the structures we believed eternal prove all too human and frail. In the end, the story of how rumors accelerate collapse serves as both warning and mirror. It reminds us that the forces capable of toppling empires often begin not with grand armies or natural disasters, but with the subtle, relentless spread of fear through human voices. The French countryside that once trembled under whispered threats now lies peaceful, its soil rich with history's lessons. Yet the silence carries an undercurrent of memory. How quickly certainty can vanish, how fragile the social fabric truly is. As we navigate our own uncertain age, the echoes of 1789 urge vigilance against the invisible currents that can turn anxiety into avalanche. Civilizations rise and endure through shared truths, but they fracture when those truths dissolve into rumor and shadow. The rupture, once begun, reshapes everything that follows, leaving future generations to wonder how a kingdom so grand could fall so swiftly to the power of words carried on the wind.